The temperature on Burrard Inlet is -9. Ice has formed along the dock lines overnight. The fireboat has been running since 04:30, not because there is a call, but because in this cold, you do not let the systems sit idle. Her crew is already at station. The harbour is still dark. Before first light, the monitors are cycled. A test burst from the roof-mounted water cannon catches the cold air and falls back across the foredeck as frozen spray. The radio is open on the working channel. The forecast was calling for southeast wind before noon, and the crew watches the water and waits. Fire on the water moves differently than fire on land. It spreads along fuel slicks. It travels below decks in ways that take time to read. It builds in sealed cargo for hours before surfacing. A fireboat's job is to get water on it before the arithmetic stops working in your favor. These are the firefighting vessels that protect Canada's working harbors, not warships, not rescue craft, not icebreakers. Their purpose is narrower and more urgent than any of those. When a pier catches fire, when a vessel burns at the dock, when a fuel terminal ignites. These are the boats that move first, from the water side. Vancouver has operated fireboats since 1928. The original vessel, the J.H. Carlisle, was funded partly by the sawmill owners whose operations lined the south shore of False Creek. They understood the calculus. A fire on the waterfront was a loss they could not absorb. The fireboat was cheaper than what the fire would cost. The current frontline vessel on Burrard Inlet is a metal craft Marine Firestorm 40, built in Kingston, Ontario, and commissioned in 2016. 43 feet overall, 14-foot beam, draft of 2.5 feet, shallow enough to work in marinas and against pier faces where a larger vessel cannot follow the fire. The hull is welded aluminum on a high-efficiency planing form. A fireboat carries roughly 25% more weight than an equivalent patrol vessel. Pumping equipment, monitors, foam system, rescue gear, TCBA storage. The hull design compensates for that load. The vessel has to plane under the weight it carries, or it loses the speed that makes it useful. At full pump output, the Firestorm 40 delivers 7,000 gallons per minute. The roof monitor, remote-controlled from the wheelhouse, can arc a water stream 400 feet. The operator manages the arc, the flow rate, and the vessel's position against a burning hull simultaneously. Proximity to the fire is controlled by the monitor's reach. The pump system draws directly from the harbour. There is no onboard water tank. The vessel is the pump. Sea chests, large intake chambers running along the keel, pull harbour water into the fire system at volumes that make a land truck's capacity look modest. The harbour is the reservoir. That constraint shapes everything about how the vessel operates. Before we continue, if this is the kind of work you want to keep watching, consider subscribing to the channel. Every video here is built around real Canadian maritime operations. The vessels, the routes, the crews, and the conditions they work in. If that matters to you, the subscribe button is how you tell us. And we want to hear from you. Did you grow up near the water? See, in Newfoundland, Nova Scotia, BC, or somewhere along the St. Lawrence? Did a family member work the fishing fleets, the Coast Guard, a cargo run, a tug? Did you spend time on these vessels yourself? Leave it in the comments. People watching this channel know these waters. We want to hear from them. Now, back to the vessel. And the crew works rotating shifts. A standard watch structure. 2 or 3 firefighters aboard at all times, cross-trained beyond land certification to cover shipboard fire behavior, hazardous materials on vessels, and water rescue procedures. The marine qualification adds operational complexity to every shift. The crew holds that readiness without ceremony the way any working boat crew does. A ship carries fire on a different schedule than a building. Below the waterline, in fuel tanks, in sealed cargo holds, heat builds for hours before surfacing. By the time smoke is visible from the water, you may already be running from behind. Reading the early signals, the smell, the hull temperature, a change in a vessel's trim is the job. Burrard Inlet handles enormous traffic: container vessels, bulk carriers, tankers, grain ships. The Port of Vancouver processes over 140 million tons of cargo per year, Canada's largest and busiest port. Every vessel in that flow carries fire risk in some form. Most of those risks never materialize. When they do, the fireboat is the first response from the water. In March of 2015, a container at the Port of Vancouver caught fire. The cargo was trichloroisocyanuric acid, a pool chemical, oxidizing and toxic when it burns. Warnings went to residents in the surrounding area. 2 fireboats attended from the water. Together with land crews, they contained the blaze without casualties. The chemical cloud dissipated before it spread. Hazardous cargo changes the approach. The type of material in the container determines the foam ratios, the stream placement, the distance from which you work, and whether you suppress the fire or let it burn down under controlled streams until the fuel is exhausted. These decisions are made fast, in smoke, at night. The crew runs the training they have already done. A marine monitor is not a hose. It is a fixed ballistic water device, powerful enough to penetrate a container wall, to knock burning material off a dock, to suppress a fuel fire from a distance that keeps the crew outside the heat zone. At full stream, the reaction force is significant enough that the vessel's position must be actively maintained against it. Across the country, on the Atlantic coast, Halifax Harbour carries its own history with fire and water. One of the largest natural harbours in the world, a working port since 1749. It has seen war, seen wreck, and in December of 1917 saw the most destructive accidental explosion in human history before the nuclear age. In its own narrows. On December 6, 1917, the French munitions ship Mont Blanc caught fire in the narrows of Halifax Harbour following a collision and exploded. Approximately 2,000 people were killed. The north end of Halifax was destroyed. The cargo, TNT, picric acid, gun cotton, had been burning for 20 minutes before the detonation. Every fireboat that has worked this harbour since carries that morning in its institutional memory. Halifax went without a dedicated full-capability fireboat for years after the Canadian Armed Forces decommissioned the CFAV Firebird in 2014. Harbour tugs with basic Firefighting firefighting classification filled part of the gap. But a dedicated marine firefighting vessel was absent from one of the busiest ports on the Canadian Atlantic coast for the better part of a decade. In June 2021, Halifax Regional Fire and Emergency took delivery of a new fireboat, built by Metalcraft Marine in Kingston, Ontario, the same builder as Vancouver's frontline vessel. And the boat was named Chipuktuk, the Mi'kmaq word for this harbour, the name the land's original peoples used for this body of water long before the city was built around it. The Chipuktuk operates year-round, around the clock, in fog, in sleet, in the damp Atlantic cold that works into Halifax Harbour from November through April. Its pump capacity exceeds 3,000 gallons per minute. The vessel cost the city approximately $1.3 million and carries a projected operational lifespan of 30 years. It is docked at Alderney Landing on the Dartmouth side. Halifax Harbour in February is cold in the way Atlantic winters are cold, not the dry stillness of the interior, but a damp cold that forms ice on mooring lines, on the handrails of an aluminum deck, on the controls inside the wheelhouse if a door is left open too long. The Chipuktuk is built for these conditions. The crew works in them regardless. The vessel protects a dense waterfront, Purdy's Wharf, the cruise terminal, Alderney, Landing itself. The ferry terminals that carry thousands of commuters across the harbour every day. The fuel facilities along the harbour's deeper reaches. Each is reachable within minutes of departure from station. The fireboat's response time to any point on Halifax Harbour is measured in single-digit minutes. The crew training for the Chipuktuk runs out of Station 13 on King Street in Halifax, with Station 15 in Woodside providing support. Land-trained firefighters, cross-trained for waterside operations, the Kipuktuk represents a harbour capability that was absent for years. Its crew understands the gap it fills and what it means for the waterfront the vessel now covers. There is a particular quality to waterfront fires that takes time to learn. The access geometry is different. The approach comes from the water. There is no staging area, no hydrant connection within reach. The fireboat is both the apparatus and the supply. The harbour is the reservoir. Everything about the operation flows outward from that single, fixed constraint. Marine firefighting is a coordination problem as much as a physical one. Or vessels from multiple agencies converge on scene. The fireboat leads, harbour tugs assist, the Coast Guard may be on station, port security controls water access. In a container ship fire or fuel terminal incident, managing the harbour itself becomes the primary operational challenge. Who is where, what is moving, and what cannot be allowed to drift. Halifax Harbour tugs, operated by Atlantic Towing, maintain FIF I1 classification, water monitors, pump capacity, some foam capability. Their crews are not trained firefighters. But a tug on scene before the fireboat arrives can apply water, push burning debris away from critical infrastructure, and put a tow line on a burning vessel to move it clear of the dock before the situation escalates. The foam systems aboard Canadian fireboats are rated for Class B fires, petroleum products, fuel oil, diesel. These are the fire categories most prevalent in a working harbour. Water alone will not extinguish a fuel fire. The foam blanket suppresses the vapour layer that feeds it. A foam capacity aboard these vessels is matched directly to the specific fuel hazard profile of the harbours they protect. In January 2019, the Hapag-Lloyd container vessel, Yantian Express, caught fire at sea while inbound for Halifax. The blaze started in deck cargo and spread to adjacent containers. A tug was dispatched from St. John's, more than 1,000 kilometres, to intercept, help suppress the fire, and tow the stricken vessel in. It took days. The Yantian Express arrived in Halifax. The lesson registered. A container ship fire at sea is beyond the harbour fireboat's reach. The fireboat's domain is the harbour, the terminals, the piers, the marinas, the fuel facilities at the water's edge. What it protects is the infrastructure the ocean traffic depends on when it finally arrives. If the dock burns, there is nowhere for the vessel to berth. The supply chain does not wait. The marine firefighting calculus does not change with the season, but the environment does. In winter, foam blankets destabilize in hard frost. Tank gear freezes on deck between uses. Exposed metal surfaces become hazards in themselves. A crew working a harbour fire in January is managing multiple environmental problems simultaneously, and doing it in the dark because in Halifax and Vancouver, serious winter weather does not wait for daylight. Vancouver's waterfront has changed since the J.H. Carlisle worked False Creek in 1928. The sawmills are gone. Industrial shoreline has given way to condominiums in some stretches, container terminals in others, but Burrard Inlet is still a working corridor, and the grain elevators at the eastern end still load vessels. The oil terminal at Westridge still transfers product to tankers. The fireboat still answers the same call. The question of who is responsible for harbour fire protection and who pays for it has been debated in Canadian port cities for over a century. Vancouver built its first fireboat under pressure from the waterfront industry. Halifax argued over it for decades. The vessel is always weighed against the cost of the loss. In a major harbour fire, the loss is not a building, the loss is the port. And the fireboats of Canadian ports are not celebrated vessels. They do not carry the public profile of a Canadian Coast Guard icebreaker on an Arctic run, or a supply ship working the northern resupply routes. They sit at station, fueled and ready. They're crew trains on scenarios the city above the harbour never thinks about. That absence of attention is, in a way, how you know the work is being done correctly. What these vessels protect is the capacity of the harbour to function. The grain elevators, the container terminals, in the cruise infrastructure, the fuel facilities, the marinas where commercial fishing vessels tie up in winter. These are not abstract economic assets. They are the physical foundations of communities that have organized themselves around water for generations. Lose them to fire and you lose something that does not come back quickly. Along the BC coast, or in Steveston, in Prince Rupert, in the harbours of the Inside Passage, commercial fishing vessels winter close alongside each other. When one catches fire in those conditions, the risk travels fast. Sun hulls are adjacent. Fuel tanks are side by side. Getting water on it early is the only thing that contains the loss before it becomes a harbour-wide event. In the communities that work around Halifax Harbour, Dartmouth, Eastern Passage, the Bedford Basin, the water is not backdrop. It is a working surface. Ferries cross it every half hour. Tugs work its edges. Cargo vessels anchor in the basin waiting for berth assignments. The harbour fireboat serves all of it. One vessel, one crew. At the entire waterline. The crews who work these boats come largely from land fire backgrounds. They have entered burning buildings. They know the structure of fire on land. Coming to the water requires relearning parts of that, and the environment does not forgive the same mistakes. Cold water at Canadian latitudes gives a person in the water minutes, not hours. Everyone on a harbour fireboat carries that number somewhere in their thinking. When major harbour fires have happened in Canada. The 1938 CPR Pier D fire in Vancouver, the 1945 Bedford Magazine fire contained before it became another Halifax explosion, the 2015 container fire at the port of Vancouver. They enter the institutional memory of every fire service that works near the water. They are why the vessel is fueled and the crew is at station before the sun comes up. The dock lights are still on at Alderney Landing. The Kipuktuk sits at her mooring. On Burrard Inlet, the Vancouver fireboat is running through its morning system checks. Nothing is burning. But that is the most accurate measure of how this work is going. The harbour is open. The infrastructure is intact. Nobody called. Another crew will take the watch at shift change. Another vessel holds position at the far end of the harbour. The marine channel is open. The monitors are primed. The work does not stop because the night was quiet. It continues the same way it began. Without ceremony, without notice, because the harbour is still there to protect. If this is the kind of maritime work you want to keep following, subscribe to the channel. There are more vessels, more routes and more operations still to document. And if you have a connection to what you just watched, a parent who ran supply to a remote community, a grandfather who worked the Grand Banks, someone who crewed an icebreaker or worked a harbour tug, tell us in the comments, what did they operate? Where did they work? What do you remember them saying about the job? The people who actually work these waters have stories that don't appear in any logbook. We want to hear them.